Hey guys, tonight we slip into the smoky shadows of a Viking longhouse, where the smell of burning ash, warm stone, and something distinctly bread-like curls through the air. The fire pops, a soft crackle against the hush of dawn, and your bed of straw scratches at your side as you sit up. It's chilly because of course it is. You're in 9th century Scandinavia. You rub your eyes, squint at the low flicker of flames, and inhale deeply. That's... is that bread? Sort of. Kind of. It wants to be bread. You reach for a tunic that smells like wood smoke and goat, and pull on boots that are still damp from yesterday's snowmelt. No one said survival was stylish. The longhouse is quiet except for the snoring of several family members and the occasional grunt from the piglet in the corner. You step over sleeping bodies and tiptoe toward the hearth. The bread's already cooking on a flat stone shoved near the coals. It's more like a rough, uneven flap of dough, somewhere between a pancake and a roof shingle. But it's warm. And in this world, warm is everything. Oh, and just so you know, you probably won't survive this. You've got wolves, rival clans, vitamin deficiencies, and the fact that your daily bread includes actual grit. And that's just breakfast. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and what time it is for you in the comments. I love seeing where you're all listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You kneel beside the woman tending the fire. She's your aunt or cousin, or maybe not related at all, but family nonetheless. She flips the bread with a carved stick and grunts at you. You're expected to help, and no one wants to eat a loaf that's been too long on one side. The smell is earthy, strong, with a hint of sourness, and yes, smoke. Always smoke. Viking bread, or flatbread, isn't fluffy. You don't slice it so much as break it. There's no crusty boule, no Instagram-worthy sourdough scoring. What you've got here is basic survival food. Thin, dry, hard as ambition. But you know what? It fills your belly, which is more than a lot of people can say. As you watch, your aunt slides a new pat of dough onto the hot rock. It sizzles faintly, steam rising. The dough's made mostly of barley and maybe a little rye. Wheat is rare and precious up here. It doesn't rise much because you don't have yeast in tidy packets. What you have is luck, a bit of sourdough starter, and possibly some leftover porridge. Historians still argue whether Viking bread was always this basic, or if wealthier households had leavened loaves tucked away. Some sagas mention softer bread at feasts, but no one can say for sure if that was poetry or pantry talk. You reach out and tear off a piece of last night's bread left on a wooden plate. It's cold now, tougher, but still chewable if you gnaw long enough. It tastes faintly sour, gritty, and comforting. Like home. Like the knowledge that for today, at least, there is food. A chicken clucks somewhere outside. The world's waking up. Soon the longhouse will buzz with children, elders, and warriors preparing for the day, repairing nets, sharpening blades, telling stories over steaming bowls of soup. But right now, it's just you, your aunt, and this little miracle of heat and grain. The longhouse walls are blackened from years of smoke. There's a vent in the roof, but not a very good one. Your eyes sting slightly as the fire flares, but you're used to it. The bread turns golden brown in places, dark in others. It's never perfectly even, but perfection isn't the point. One little known fact: Viking longhouses sometimes had multiple hearths or movable fire pits, so that several flatbreads could be made at once. Imagine the scent on a feast day, dozens of rough, sour loaves to be smeared with butter or dunked in broth. Not that there's much butter today. This is an ordinary morning, and the goats are still half asleep. You hear movement behind you, your younger brother yawning and dragging a fur behind him. He plops beside you and reaches for a piece of cooling bread. You don't speak much. You don't need to. Bread has been the breakfast of choice for centuries, long before anyone ever thought to write down a recipe. A cheeky tidbit? Some archaeologists believe the Vikings occasionally added crushed animal bones into their flour mix when times were lean. Adds calcium. Maybe a little crunch. Who needs multivitamins when you've got marrow dust muffins? You help your aunt mix another bowl of dough. She shows you how to feel when it's right. Not too wet, not too stiff. The flour was ground yesterday on a stone quern, the kind that turns your arms to mush, Your shoulders ache just thinking about it. Soon it's your turn to watch the flatbread on the stone. You wait until the edges lift slightly, then carefully peel it up with a stick. It's hot, heavier than it looks, but successful. No burn marks, no uncooked patches. Your aunt nods. You did okay. You sit beside your brother and share the warm bread. Outside, frost glints on the grass, and the first pink fingers of dawn creep over the hills. The cold will bite soon, but for now you've got warmth, you've got food, and your stomach isn't gnawing at itself. There's a rhythm here. Grind, mix, bake, share. It's not glamorous, but it's life. Viking life. And that's what you're living. One chewy bite at a time. Awaiting continue, you start the day not with a yawn, but with a grunt, because today you're grinding flour. And no one's ever yawned while doing that without inhaling a lungful of airborne barley dust. You kneel in front of the quern, a heavy slab of stone with a circular top piece that has to be rotated by hand. It's like a giant mortar and pestle, except it hates your wrists and punishes your spine. You place a handful of barley grains into the hole at the top, then grab the wooden handle and begin to rotate. Around and around. It's like stirring a vat of peanut butter, except the reward is flour. Sort of. At least the powder that slowly dribbles out the side might someday become bread. If you're lucky, you grind until your shoulder burns and your knees complain. You switch hands, then you switch again. Someone coughs behind you. Your cousin's turn. But she shrugs and lets you keep going. That's fine. She'll deal with the fire later. For now, you are the flour master, the barley breaker, the grind gremlin. Viking families didn't have electric mills or KitchenAids, obviously, just muscle. And when the grains ran out, well, you got creative. Whatever was on hand, millet, rye, oats, ended up in the hopper. Some homes even mixed in dried peas, crushed acorns, or moss to stretch the flour farther. Artisan blend, you mutter, wincing as a grain ricochets off your eyebrow. Historians still argue whether this stone-ground flour was ever sifted. Some say yes, coarse sieves made of hair or linen might have been used to pull out the biggest chunks. Others believe the Vikings just shrugged and ate it all. Husk, grit, and all. Who has time to be picky when winter's at the door? By the way, your hands are now completely coated in flour dust. You scratch your nose, mistake. You sneeze violently, and your cousin finally laughs. She always waits until you're mid-sneeze to admit something's funny. The floor beneath you is strewn with errant barley grains and flour powder. Even the dog is dusted like a cinnamon bun. You glance at the quern and sigh. Barely a bowlful so far. At this rate, you'll have enough for one loaf by lunchtime. 2 if your aunt's feeling generous with the water. Another fun tidbit? Grinding grain with a quernstone tends to wear little flecks of stone into the flour. Not great for teeth. Archaeologists examining Viking-age skeletons consistently find extreme dental wear, flattened molars, cracked enamel, and enough tooth erosion make a dentist weep. The daily bread literally ground down people's teeth over time. Your cousin takes over the grinding, and you stretch your arms, feeling the ache deep in your muscles. No gym required. Just give it 20 more years and you'll have biceps like Thor, or chronic joint pain. Hard to say which. You walk to the barrel where the ground flour is collected and poke at the gritty mass with your finger. It's coarse, uneven, full of texture. You might call it rustic, but that's a modern excuse for we did our best with rocks. Still, there's something hypnotic about it. The way the flour puffs when stirred, the scent of raw grain, even the cool smoothness of the stone bowl beneath it. You run your hands through it like sand on a beach, if that beach were in a perpetual cloud of dust and haunted by gluten. Vikings didn't have yeast as we know it, but natural fermentation was a thing. Some doughs were mixed and left out overnight to bubble faintly from wild yeasts in the air. Others were baked immediately, dense and hard, and meant for dipping in stew. You think of that as you carry your precious flour toward the hearth. Already dreaming of warm flatbread with just a smear of goat butter, if the goats haven't wandered off again. You pass by your uncle, who's fiddling with fishhooks near the door. He raises an eyebrow at the flour coating your tunic. You raise one back. It's the universal Viking salute for, I did something useful, praise me. He doesn't. Classic. You return to the fire, where your aunt's boiling something in a cauldron that smells like onions, fish, and regret. You set the flour down and begin mixing, just a bit of water at first, then more as the powder drinks it in. Your hands become sticky, then pasty, then completely submerged in what might be the most uncooperative dough this side of the fjords. You knead it with your palms, folding and pressing, coaxing it into something vaguely cohesive. It resists, it tears, it fights back. And you press harder. You could be in a modern kitchen or 1,000 years in the past. It doesn't matter. This part hasn't changed. Historians often debate whether flour was stored in wooden bins, leather sacks, or clay jars. You look over at your family's container, a hollowed-out tree trunk. That answers that. It keeps the mice out, mostly. Except for that one time, but we don't talk about that loaf. As the dough starts to come together, your hands finally win the battle. It's shaggy, sticky, and full of personality, like your younger brother. You form a few small discs and lay them out near the fire to rest. They won't rise much, no soft, pillowy miracles here, but they'll firm up a bit. In the meantime, your cousin is still grinding. She glares at you. You offer her a future slice. She accepts. Bread diplomacy wins again. You lean against the log wall, watching the dough slowly flatten under its own weight, and think about how many hands have done this. Generation after generation, each kneeling at the stone, grinding grain so their family could live one more day. Not glamorous, but deeply, achingly human. Awaiting continue. You squint at the dough in your hands, then at the pile of flour. Something's off. It's too pale, too fine. Not like yesterday's batch. You lean closer and notice something fibrous, thin strands and little specks of bark. Your aunt shrugs from across the hearth. Elm, she says simply, as if that explains everything. It does, sort of, because today you're baking bark bread. Yes, actual tree bark. Not in a trendy foraged by a bearded hipster way. No, this is survival. The grains didn't stretch far enough, so you padded the dough with finely ground elm bark, dried nettles, and a pinch of ash. And you know what? It's not as weird as it sounds. Not in Viking land. You start kneading, carefully mixing in the bark blend. The texture is rougher now, fibrous and a bit stringy, but manageable. Your fingers itch from the nettles. You ignore it. Part of the charm, right? Historians still argue whether the Vikings added tree bark by choice or out of necessity. Some claim it was a famine food, used only when grain supplies ran low. Others suggest bark was a regular supplement, a filler that made the flour last longer and added health benefits. Whatever the reason, you're elbow deep in elm dough now, and there's no turning back. A cheeky side note, bark bread never really disappeared. During World War II, folks in Finland brought it back in style, or, well, in desperation. It's not just a Viking thing. It's a we're out of options thing. The dough smells earthy, not in a comforting, warm loaf way. More like someone mashed up a forest floor and said, throw it on the griddle. You look at your cousin, who's sniffing her fingers suspiciously. Do we toast this extra long, she asks. Your aunt just grunts. The fire is low and glowing red, perfect for baking. You flatten the dough into thin discs. They're not smooth. Bits of leaf and bark poke through like little memories of trees past. You lay the first one near the coals, watching as steam curls up almost immediately. The bark makes it sizzle faster. You sniff again. Still weird. Kind of like bread, and kind of like a compost heap. But also edible. You hope. The Vikings didn't have a single recipe for bread. It was always changing, always adapting, based on what you had, what the gods sent, and how many mouths were waiting to eat. So today's bread has bark. Tomorrow might include ground fish bones. Yesterday's batch had leftover turnip mash. Bread was more a suggestion than a science. You poke at the edge of your first flatbread. It's curling slightly, and the underside has browned, well, blackened in some places. You flip it carefully with a stick. The top hisses against the rock. You hear a crunch behind you and turn to see your younger brother chewing a raw piece of dough. Why, you ask, alarmed. Tastes like tree, he replies cheerfully, mouth full. Not bad. Children, you think, are the bravest souls, or maybe just taste blind. Back in the dough pile, your cousin is now shaping her own discs. She's added something extra, wild herbs from outside. They give the dough a greenish tint and a sharper smell. You lean in. Juniper? Maybe sorrel? Another weird truth? Vikings used what was available. Onions, leeks, garlic, mushrooms, and herbs often went into breads to cover up off flavors. Or to add something interesting. You know, like the sensation of eating a sandwich and a salad at the same time. Your cousin's herb loaf looks better than yours. You tell her that. She smirks. Taste test later, she says, sliding hers onto the stone with exaggerated grace. A few of the older women near the far wall are whispering about adding dandelion leaves or crushed berries to the next batch. One swears by caraway seeds. Another mutters that it all tastes like burnt moss no matter what you do. You can't help but smile. Food is conversation, even here, even now. Bread isn't just calories. It's creativity. It's memory. It's debate. As you tend the barky bread, flipping each round as the edges crisp, you realize the rhythm of it. The placement, the timing, the constant watchfulness, it's almost like meditation. Only instead of clearing your mind, you're calculating cook times and trying not to set yourself on fire. The smoke stings your eyes as a chunk of birch log logs shifts in the hearth. Flames lick closer to one of your rounds, and you quickly yank it back with your stick. It's fine. A little scorched. Adds flavor. Probably. You stack the finished rounds on a wooden board. They're uneven, a little charred, and absolutely chewy. Bark gives bread a distinctive rubbery bite. You chew, then chew some more. It's not bad. Kind of like trail mix's long-lost cousin. You can feel it scraping the back of your throat, and your stomach reacts with a cautious growl. Still, it fills you. Outside, someone's returning from the woods with a bundle of firewood and a handful of early mushrooms. They'll go in the stew. Maybe tomorrow they'll end up in the dough. Bread, after all, is just the edible canvas for whatever the land gives, or whatever you can scavenge. You take another bite and offer a piece to your cousin. She nibbles, then raises an eyebrow. It's not the worst, she says with a crooked grin. High praise in a Viking kitchen. The loaf your brother dropped too close to the coals is now smoking. He tries to salvage it, but it crumbles. He eats it anyway. You pretend not to see. Vikings didn't waste food. Not when every grain, every scrap had to be ground, gathered, or traded. And if your bread came out half ash and half bark, well, it was still bread. You settle beside the hearth, gnawing on your bark loaf, watching the steam rise in lazy spirals. It's not a feast, but it's enough. And in a world of harsh winters and harder choices, enough is sacred. Awaiting continue. Your fingers are still dusted with flour when the knocking starts. Sharp, rhythmic, purposeful. It's not an enemy raid, thank the gods, just a trader passing through with a sack slung over his shoulder and mud crusted on his boots. You exchange nods. He opens the sack, and out pours the future. Wheat. Golden, clean, and gloriously foreign. You stare at the grains like they're treasure, because to a Viking, they are. Wheat is rare this far north. Too delicate to grow in most Scandinavian soil, too needy for long daylight and good drainage. But when it shows up, oh, it elevates your bread game. You run your hand through the soft kernels. They're sleek compared to barley, less bitter than rye. Your aunt raises an eyebrow. You both know what this means. Celebration bread. Wheat was often reserved for special occasions. Feasts, weddings, sacrifices to the gods, or when someone somehow returned from a raid with all limbs intact. You're not sure what today's occasion is, but you're not questioning it. Historians still debate whether Viking wheat imports came mainly from England, Francia, or deeper inland via the Baltic trade routes. Wherever it came from, it arrived in small, precious quantities. And when you had it, you used it. Carefully. You scoop up a handful and mix it gently into your coarse flour. No bark today, thank Odin. Just a blend of barley and wheat, enough for a slightly fluffier loaf. Maybe even soft enough to bite without fear of immediate dental destruction. Your aunt hums softly as she adds water, and the dough turns smoother almost instantly. Less grainy, more pliant. It feels like dough from a different world. A cleaner, richer world. One where people probably wash their tunics more than twice a season. You wonder aloud how much the trader paid for it. Or bartered. Some amber? A good comb? Maybe a chunk of whale ivory. No one knows. No one asks. In Viking society, currency was flexible, like bread recipes and personal hygiene standards. You knead the dough with new reverence. It yields more easily under your fingers, stretching without tearing, as if grateful to be touched. For a second, you imagine a full loaf. Round, domed, golden. The kind of bread you've only seen at feasts when chieftains smile and children stop crying for 2 whole minutes. You chuckle. That's the power of wheat. mood-altering carbohydrates. As the dough rests, your aunt begins heating a special stone, a flat, heavy one that's only used when guests are around. It's smoother than the usual fire rocks, and your cousin rubs it down with a scrap of cloth, muttering that it cooks more evenly. She might be right, or maybe the bread just tastes better because you want it to. The fire roars a little higher. The bread's time is near. A quirky tidbit? Some Viking-age graves contain what archaeologists think are charred remains of wheat bread, little burnt discs tucked beside bodies as if to say, "Here, in case the afterlife has terrible catering." They're often found with combs, knives, and beads. Bread was part of the essentials, apparently, because even in death, carbs are non-negotiable. You shape the loaf into something special. Instead of the usual flat disc, you mound it gently, patting it like a sleepy cat. Your cousin leans over and whispers, "Make it look like you tried." You stick your tongue out. She's not wrong, though. This bread deserves a little vanity. With the stone heated and the fire glowing just right, you slide the loaf into place. It sizzles slightly, not too much. You cover it with an overturned iron pot, trapping the heat. Viking ovens were often just that: hot stones, embers, and clever lid tricks. You wait. Time stretches. You poke the embers. You chew a piece of last night's bark biscuit and immediately regret it. You poke the bread. Not yet. Finally, you lift the pot and a wave of warm, nutty steam escapes. You inhale deeply. The smell is pure nostalgia, even if you've never smelled it before. The loaf is golden on the bottom and domed slightly on top. You tap it, hollow, like it's full of secrets. You grin. Now comes the hard part, waiting for it to cool. Your cousin suggests skipping that part. You agree. You both blow on a slice and take a bite. It's soft. Still dense, still Viking, but with a gentler chew. A flavor that hums instead of punches. You nod. It's good. Worth bartering for. Worth grinding for. Wheat bread was aspirational in the Viking world. A taste of somewhere else, of trade routes and distant kings. It made ordinary people feel important, even for a meal. And here you are, chewing it barefoot by the fire, feeling like royalty. The rest of the family joins in, tearing pieces from the loaf and dipping them in broth. No one talks much, just eating, tearing, dipping, swallowing. Bread in this moment is more than food. It's community. And for a few bites, it's not cold, it's not hard, it's not bark. It's something beautiful. There's a breeze this morning, thick with the scent of peat smoke and fish guts, which can only mean one thing. Today is market day. You sling your basket over your shoulder, half full of yesterday's wheat loaves, and step onto the muddy path that winds through the settlement toward the trading stalls. Time to swap your bread for someone else's hard-earned prize. Your loaves don't exactly scream luxury. One is a bit flatter than you'd like, another slightly scorched on the bottom. But they're wheat-based, and that gives them status. You feel a little like you're carrying treasure, edible treasure that might score you something exciting, like smoked herring, or, dare you dream, soap. The market buzzes with Viking energy, loud, raw, and unapologetically fragrant. You pass a man selling carved bone needles and another displaying dyed wool. A woman with soot-streaked arms haggles over a basket of onions. You spot a child gnawing on what looks suspiciously like a loaf made entirely of dried peas. You wince in solidarity. A trader from across the fjord waves you over. He's got sacks of dried apples and what he claims is real cinnamon bark. You raise an eyebrow. Historians still argue whether the Vikings ever had access to true cinnamon or just used local substitutes that sort of smelled spicy if you squinted and imagined hard enough. Either way, the man's smile is a little too wide. Still, he eyes your wheat bread like it's gilded in silver. You trade 2 loaves for a pouch of dried apples and a fistful of something he calls sun herbs. They smell lemony. You're not sure they're safe. You'll test a nibble on your little brother later. He bounces back quickly. You wander deeper into the market and spot something miraculous, a chunk of salt cod. You nearly drop your basket. Salt was precious, used not just for food, but for preserving, bartering, and, allegedly, some ritual cleansings that no one likes to talk about. The man guarding the cod has arms like oak trunks and a scowl carved by sea winds. You hold up your last loaf, offer the dried apples too, and toss in a strip of birch bark as a peace offering. He grunts once and slides you the cod. Success. Now you're down to 1 burned corner of bread, a scrap really. You chew it as you wander, tasting ash and faint notes of regret. A dog stares at you hungrily. You toss him the last bite. It's a Viking tradition, after all. Never waste food, especially when someone smaller might need it. You pass by a stall displaying a curious object, a small, blackened puck with a bite taken out of it. It's in a bowl marked grain disc, 9th century. An old woman with silver in her hair tells you it was dug up from a bog, preserved perfectly. You lean closer. It looks like something you scorched last week. A quirky tidbit? Some Viking-era bread remnants have actually been found in burial sites and bogs, hardened, charred, preserved by accident. One famous find in Denmark revealed a little bread puck still showing fingerprints where someone had pressed it before baking. You wonder if they were proud of that loaf, or annoyed it got burnt. Your cousin catches up to you, arms full of leeks and a very smug expression. She got honey. Actual, sticky, golden honey. You gasp audibly. She offers you a lick, and it's so sweet your tongue forgets how to handle it. You both laugh like fools. Today is a good day. You find a shady spot near the outer wall of the longhouse and sit together, watching the market pulse and shift like a living thing. You nibble the dried apples. They're tart and chewy, and they go surprisingly well with memories of warm bread. Trade in Viking society was about more than goods. It was about stories, alliances, trust. You never just exchanged food, you exchanged reputation. If your bread was good, people remembered. If it was bad, well, that traveled faster than a raiding ship with a tailwind. You think about that as you watch a woman inspect a tray of barley cakes. She turns one over, sniffs it, then sets it down with a frown. Harsh, but fair. Viking markets didn't sugarcoat, literally or metaphorically. A small boy tries to barter with a squirrel pelt, and what he swears is a magical feather. The stall owner isn't convinced. He offers him a crusty corner of something oat-based. The boy takes it anyway and skips off happily. His standards are low, or maybe he's just that hungry. You rise, brushing dust from your tunic, and make your way back toward home. The path is quieter now, dotted with folks carrying baskets full of onions, fish, wool, and the occasional baby goat. You pass a group of traders talking in low voices, one of them holding what looks like a brick of ice-hard cheese. You try not to make eye contact. Bread might be central to your life, but in this world, it's just one thread in a very tangled web of trade and survival. Your loaves earned you salt, apples, and a taste of honey. Tomorrow? Who knows? Maybe fish eyes and turnip ends. But that's the beauty of Viking trade. It's messy, loud, inconsistent, and sometimes it pays off in cinnamon bark and salted miracles. You reach the longhouse just as the sun starts to dip. The smell of stew greets you at the door, leek, cod, and maybe a suspicious hint of those sun herbs. You smile. It'll pair perfectly with tomorrow's bread. And maybe, just maybe, your aunt will share the honey. Word count, 1,000 you. To the sharp tang of smoke and the muffled clatter of pots. Someone's up early, and not just to watch the sunrise in a romantic frostbitten haze. You blink and stretch on your straw mattress, swatting away a gnat that's decided your face is its new empire. Through the low murmur of voices and the occasional cluck of a hen being rudely relocated, you catch it. The telltale scrape of a hand mill grinding grain. Grinding day. You groan. You were hoping it wouldn't be your turn, but your aunt's voice cuts through the air like a well-aimed spear. You'll do it right this time. No bark. I mean it. That stings. You thought that bark batch had character. Grinding grain in a Viking household isn't just a chore, it's a full-body experience. First, you gather the barley, or rye, or on blessed days, a handful of wheat. You inspect for mold, bugs, and those weird seeds that might be poisonous, but you're still not entirely sure. Then it's on to the quernstone, a pair of heavy, circular rocks designed to test the limits of your patience and your triceps. You kneel, place the grain in the central hole of the top stone, and begin to rotate it. Around. And around. And around. Time slows. Your arms begin to hum. Your mind drifts. It's easy to see why the grindstone was often a metaphor for life in Viking poetry. Slow, repetitive, punishing, and eventually producing something useful? Maybe. A mainstream historical fact? Most Viking households had a quernstone for grinding. They came in different shapes, some saddle-shaped, others rotary, and were often passed down through generations. It wasn't uncommon for two people to work a larger one together. The most advanced ones even used water power. Those were rare, and mostly found at big estates or monasteries with way too much free time. You stop to stretch your arms and sniff the flour. It's coarser than modern stuff. You could exfoliate your face with this, but it smells earthy and honest. A mix of grain, hard labor, and just a hint of wild yeast floating through the air like invisible flavor confetti. Your cousin joins you, flopping down dramatically and declaring she's done peeling onions for the next decade. You hand her the handle. Teamwork. She groans and starts turning the stone. The rhythm returns. Grinding grain takes time, and time in a Viking household is never wasted. While she works, you prep the next batch. Sifting the flour, yes, really, Vikings did that sometimes. Not always, and not perfectly, but they'd use sieves made of horsehair or fine cloth to remove the bigger bits. You joke that the coarser bits build character. She says they build dental bills. As the pile of flour grows, your aunt brings out a small linen pouch. She opens it with exaggerated ceremony, revealing a tiny handful of seeds. Flax. You gasp like she's shown you a buried treasure. In a way, she has. Flax seeds were used in Viking bread. Not always, not often, but when available, they added crunch, oil, and a bit of smug satisfaction. You mix them in carefully. This is going to be a fancy batch. A quirky tidbit? Some archaeobotanists studying Viking latrines, yes, actual Viking poop, have found undigested flax seeds and barley husks, offering insight into what exactly went into their bread and what came out. Viking digestion, not a mystery anymore. As the day wears on, the grindstone rhythm becomes background music. People come and go, asking for help with laundry, fetching water, moving firewood. Your flour pile grows. You're proud of it in the same way a modern person might be proud of a well-organized pantry or an Instagram-worthy loaf. Only here, it's survival, not aesthetics. Finally, the flour is ready. You mix it with water, a touch of salt, and this time, you try something new. Your cousin suggests using the last scoop of sour porridge from yesterday's breakfast. Fermentation. It might make the dough rise, or it might make it scream. Either way, you're experimenting. Historians still argue whether Viking households practiced intentional fermentation in bread making. Some claim they stumbled upon it occasionally, thanks to ambient yeast and forgotten bowls. Others think they deliberately cultivated sourdough-like cultures. There's no definitive answer, but your porridge smells ready to do something. You knead the dough until it springs back a little. Not soft, but alive. Elastic. Your aunt raises an eyebrow and mutters, "You've learned." You beam. The fire's already going. You set the stone to heat and cover the dough, letting it sit just long enough for a few bubbles to form. Not a full rise, not even close. But enough to make the bread puff a little when baked. You shape the loaves by hand, discs mostly, but one experimental oval. Your cousin names it the ship loaf. You don't correct her. It does sort of look like a canoe ran into a mudslide. You bake them under the iron pot again, one by one, flipping halfway through. The smell is deeper this time. Earthy, nutty, a little tangy. You know it's the sour porridge doing its magic. Or chaos. Either way, the bread looks promising. As the last loaf comes off the stone, you line them up with pride. Slightly risen, still dense, crusty on the outside. A small step forward in your bread evolution. You break one open. Steam curls into the air. The inside is chewy, moist, a little sour, and delightfully studded with flaxseed. Your aunt takes a bite and nods. "Keep doing that," she says. "You might be useful after all." High praise in this household. Later that night, everyone gathers to eat. The bread vanishes quickly, yet sopped in broth and scraped with smoked fish. No one complains. Even your little brother doesn't try to trade his slice for beetroot this time. You lean back against the wall, arms sore but satisfied. You made this. From flour to fire, one grind at a time. And best of all, no bark. Word count. Awaiting continue. By midweek, the weather turns. The skies thicken like overcooked porridge, and rain begins to fall with the persistent, unbothered confidence of something that could keep going for days. It seeps through thatch roofs, soaks through tunics, and puddles in every possible inconvenient place, including your best boots, which now squelch with every step like sad, wet bread rolls. It's baking weather. Not the cheerful kind with sunshine and floral aprons, more like the huddle around the hearth or freeze sort. You're inside with your cousin, your aunt, 2 hens that won't shut up, and a pot of bubbling stew that smells vaguely of turnip and regret. Your uncle is out mending the boat because nothing stops a Viking, not even sideways rain. With little else to do, you revisit a long-held dream, baking the perfect Viking loaf. You grab your flour, coarse, still speckled with the odd grain husk, and mix it with water and just a pinch of salt. But this time you're feeling experimental. Remember those dried apples you got at the market? You chop them finely and add a sprinkle to the dough. Sweet Viking bread. Bold, risky. Maybe illegal in Denmark. But you do it anyway. As you knead, your aunt raises one eyebrow, then turns away without a word. That's her version of encouragement. Mainstream historical fact incoming. While the majority of Viking bread was savory, evidence shows occasional use of dried fruits and honey in ceremonial or festive loaves, especially in wealthier households or at seasonal feasts when people pulled out all the stops. And the apples. The dough comes together sticky and fragrant, and you shape it into something round and squat. Not elegant. Not yet, but hopeful. You cover it with a cloth and let it sit by the hearth while the storm rages on. A gentle heat encourages something wild and mysterious. Fermentation. The dough grows, just slightly. It breathes. Your cousin peers over your shoulder and whispers, "It's alive." You nod? Barely. It's time for fire. But here's the challenge. Your main baking stone cracked yesterday during a particularly heated barley cake emergency. You have to get creative. So you fetch a flat iron plate used mostly for drying herbs and sit it above the coals, balanced on 3 stones. It wobbles, threatens collapse, but you say a silent Viking prayer to the household spirits and proceed. As the loaf bakes, it begins to smell amazing. Warm fruit, grain, and just a touch of smoke. Everyone gathers around, drawn by the scent like bears to honey. Even the hens look mildly impressed. You flip the loaf. It's golden. The bottom's crisp. The top puffs slightly. You tap it and hear a hollow thunk, the Viking bread equivalent of a standing ovation. A quirky tidbit. In some regions of Scandinavia, archaeologists have uncovered what they believe to be bread ovens inside longhouses. Primitive but effective. These were rare and typically reserved for wealthier families or communal cooking. Most people, like you, used hot stones, pots, or even buried their dough under ashes to bake it slowly. Some baked directly on the hearthstone, and occasionally, in emergencies, on iron herb plates. Innovation! You pull your creation from the heat and let it cool, though not without 15 hands reaching for a piece first. You swat them away. This is a tasting event, a moment. You slice into it carefully, revealing a dense but tender crumb flecked with apple pieces and wisps of steam. You take the first bite. Chewy, sweet, earthy. You pause. It's good. Maybe not the best bread in the fjord, but definitely top 25. Your cousin nods solemnly. "I'd trade a whole fish for this," she says. Your little brother grabs a piece and immediately licks it. I call this one classic. There's something beautiful about bread on a rainy day. Outside, the wind howls. Inside, your hands are warm, your belly is full, and the world smells like something you made from scratch. You feel powerful, slightly smug. You should. Later that afternoon, the rain slackens to a drizzle, and your aunt decides it's time to replenish the grain stores. You're recruited to help. You throw on your damp boots and trudge to the storage pit, which is basically a covered hole with wooden beams and a thick layer of straw insulation. Inside, sacks of barley, rye, a little wheat, and possibly 1 or 2 mice with excellent taste in carbs. You take stock. The barley's good, but low. The rye smells fine, though some is sprouted. That can still be used for porridge or rough cakes, but not your high-ambition bread. The wheat sack is laughably small, but you set it aside like treasure anyway. Historians still argue whether Viking grain storage methods were reliable enough to keep mold and pests at bay for full seasons. Some evidence suggests they used airtight clay jars or buried their stores deeper into frost lines. Others argue that spoilage was common and grain had to be inspected constantly. You lean toward the latter. You've had way too many bread batches go fuzzy to believe in airtight anything. You return to the longhouse, sacks in tow, and help sort the new flour. Your aunt measures it out with practiced hands. She's mentally planning the next week's meals: porridge, bread, stew thickener, and if she's feeling ambitious, oatcakes. By now, the rain has stopped entirely. The ground squelches, but the sky breaks open just enough to let a sliver of golden light fall across the hearth. It hits the apple loaf. still resting on the plate, and makes it glow like something sacred. You grin. Maybe tomorrow you'll try adding herbs. Or try that thing you heard from a trader, letting dough ferment for 2 full days, then baking it low and slow. Your cousin calls it bread magic. You just want to see if it bubbles. The Viking world is rough, rainy, unforgiving. But every now and then you get a moment like this. Warm bread, a quiet fire, and a storm held at bay. You take another bite. Still good. Still good. You wake to the sound of gulls. Sharp, bossy, and always 3 hours too early. The sea wind tugs at the edge of the thatch roof, and you can smell salt and fish from 100 yards away. Today's the day for trading, which means brushing the ash out of your hair, pretending you're not wearing the same tunic 3 days in a row, and, most importantly, bringing something worth trading. And what do you have? Bread, of course. But not just any bread. You gather your best loaves, last night's apple creation, a few solid barley rounds, and one slightly overbaked disc you've renamed crispy flatbread to make it sound intentional. You wrap them in a woven cloth and head out, dodging goats and small children wielding sticks like swords. The market sits near the docks, where long ships bob like oversized water beetles, and traders shout in 6 dialects. It's noisy, chaotic, and kind of amazing. Everything smells like fish, seaweed, smoke, and sweaty ambition. Mainstream historical fact time, Viking markets, or kaupangar, were hubs of trade, socializing, and even matchmaking. Some were permanent towns like Hedeby or Birka, while others popped up seasonally along riverbanks and coasts. Here, people traded everything from furs and beads to amber, tools, livestock, and yes, food. You lay out your bread carefully, brushing a few crumbs off the cloth and trying to look calm and confident, even though your stomach's doing somersaults. A trader with silver bangles and a beard so long it could have its own saga ambles over. He squints at your loaves, picks one up, sniffs it, and, without asking, takes a bite. You hold your breath. He chews slowly, then he grins. You use sour mash? You nod. And dried apple? He whistles. Fancy. You smile like you're not dying inside. 2 loaves for a jar of preserved herring? He offers. You counter. 3 loaves, 1 jar, and a pouch of dried seaweed. He laughs, but agrees. Victory. You've just bartered Viking style, and all it took was yeast and nerve. A quirky tidbit. There's evidence that Vikings sometimes brought bread as travel provisions, especially the flatter, drier kinds that resisted mold. Think ancient granola bars, but with fewer nuts and more barley grit. Some of these travel breads were found in ship burials, tucked near the deceased like edible good luck charms. You trade 2 more loaves for a new belt knife, a decent one, not one of those wobbly, rust-prone imports, and another for a bundle of dried herbs, thyme, lovage, maybe even some wild onion. You're building your pantry, 1 loaf at a time. By midday, your bread's gone. All of it. Even the crispy flatbread. A child bought it with 2 coins and a rock that she swears is magic. You keep the rock. You wander the market, nibbling a smoked fish skewer and listening to gossip. A woman from across the fjord claims she makes bread with milk and eggs. For softness, she says, like she invented clouds. You raise an eyebrow but store the idea for later. Milk bread. Could it work? Historians still argue whether dairy products were used in Viking baking. Milk was precious and perishable, more often churned into butter or cheese. But in richer households or during spring, it's possible that fresh milk ended up in dough, especially for special occasions or spoiled children. You spot a man selling flat cakes with an herb crust. Intrigued, you buy one, bite into it, and are hit with the zing of wild garlic. It's dense, earthy, and surprisingly good. You chat with the vendor. He bakes them on a slab of slate, flipped quickly for a crisp outside and soft middle. Just like my grandmother made, he says. You nod solemnly. Grandmothers know everything. Later, on the walk home, your basket now full of treasures, you reflect on the quiet power of bread. It's not just food, it's currency. Reputation. Connection. You baked something from scratch, traded it for tools and flavors, and learned 3 new things without even trying. Back at the longhouse, your cousin eyes your new knife with thinly veiled jealousy. Trade bread again? She asks. You nod. You're basically unstoppable now, she mutters. Dinner's a warm bowl of fish stew with fresh herbs, thickened with a handful of leftover rye crumbs. You eat slowly, already thinking about tomorrow's bake. Milk bread, garlic crusts, maybe even a honey drizzle if the bees are generous. You take out your magic rock and place it on the hearth beside the quernstone. Good luck, or at least a conversation starter. Later that night, the longhouse quiets. Embers glow. You sit by the fire and sketch ideas into the dirt with a stick. Bread shapes, new ingredients, maybe a different way to trap more steam under the pot for fluffier loaves. Your mind hums with flour-dusted possibility. Bread isn't just something you eat here. It's a project, a dream, a quiet revolution with barley. You lie down, already imagining the next market day, the smell of loaves wrapped in cloth, and the wide-eyed faces of traders who didn't expect that much flavor from a lump of Viking dough. Awaiting continue. You wake with flour in your hair. Again, you'd like to think this is because you're deeply committed to the baking arts, but truthfully, you just fell asleep on the kneading bench. There's a faint print of a barley husk pressed into your cheek. It's early, the sky barely streaked with dawnlight, but already your aunt is bustling about, stoking the hearth and muttering about someone forgetting to soak the lentils. You slide quietly into the background, hoping to be mistaken for a log. But the smell of yesterday's trade, dried garlic, smoked herring, a hint of sweet seaweed, still clings to your tunic, and your cousin clocks you immediately. Going to try milk bread today? Of course you are. But first, you need milk. Your family owns 2 goats. Their names are both Bjorn for reasons no one can explain. They are temperamental and possibly evil. You approach them with the calm confidence of someone who once saw a goat fall off a log and still doesn't trust them. Mainstream historical fact: Viking farms commonly included goats, cows, and sheep, not just for meat, but for dairy. Goat's milk was particularly common in mountainous or remote regions. And yes, Vikings did know how to make butter, cheese, and drinkable milk. Whether it ended up in bread is still debated, but they had the tools for it. You coax a small bowl's worth of milk from Bjorn number 1. Bjorn number 2 headbutts the fence and bleats like he's been wronged by destiny. You thank them both and retreat quickly. In the longhouse, you warm the milk slightly by the fire, not enough to scald, just enough to take off the chill. You mix it with your coarse flour, a dash of salt, and a drizzle of honey from the tiny clay pot you've been hoarding since spring. This dough is stickier, softer, and smells, dare you say it? Decadent. Your aunt side-eyes you. Milk bread? Experiment. Humph. The dough rises slowly, nestled beside the hearth under a cloth. It looks almost smug, like it knows it's going to change everything. A quirky tidbit. In some Norse sagas, bread is described in symbolic terms. Not just food, but metaphor. A dry loaf might reflect a stingy host, while a soft, rich one was a sign of welcome. Some scholars believe specific types of bread were tied to rites of hospitality, with better loaves served to guests of high status. You decide this is the bread you'd serve a king, or at least someone with a full set of teeth. Once the dough has puffed and yielded under your fingers, you form it into a rough circle and nestle it into your best baking pot. You cover it with the iron lid, surround it with embers, and wait. Waiting, by the way, is the worst part of baking. Vikings didn't have timers, just instincts. You poke at coals, whisper to the pot, and count your breaths. You make exactly 3 jokes to your cousin, who ignores 2 and snorts at 1. Progress. Finally, you crack the lid. Steam escapes in a heavenly puff. The crust is golden, the top kissed with ash, and when you tip the loaf out, it lands with a soft, promising bounce. You tear off a piece, fluffy, almost creamy, with a faint sweetness that makes you blink in surprise. You take another bite, then a third. This might be it. Your aunt tries a piece and doesn't say anything for a full 30 seconds. Then she nods once and keeps chewing. That's practically a standing ovation in your household. Historians still argue whether softness in Viking bread was ever intentional. Most evidence points to dense, chewy loaves, more fuel than delight. But occasional finds suggest that softer loaves made with richer ingredients like milk, eggs, or fat existed. Were they common? Probably not. Were they treasured? Almost certainly. You decide to name this loaf Dagbrot, day bread, because it makes the whole day better. By now, the rest of the family wants in. You promise to make another tomorrow if the goats allow. Meanwhile, your brother eats his piece like it's his last meal, then licks his fingers dramatically. Outside, the weather is shifting again. A warm breeze cuts through the chill, and the birds have resumed yelling at each other in the trees. You gather your basket and venture out to collect herbs. You're thinking ahead, a savory version next time, maybe with thyme and roasted onion, milk bread with edge. You stop by the neighbor's field, where she grows onions the size of your fist and doesn't mind if you trade for them with bread scraps. You offer a crusty heel and get 2 small bulbs in return. Perfect. On the walk home, you imagine a future where people line up for your loaves, where sailors carry your bread across oceans, where someone carves your likeness into a baking stone and says, "This is the one who made bread soft." A bit dramatic, sure, but you're running on carbs and dreams. Back at the longhouse, you sketch a few designs into the ash beside the hearth, symbols for different flavors: apple, garlic, sweet, salty. You're making a system, a bread code. The others laugh, but you know. You're onto something. You sharpen your new knife on a flat stone, not just because it needs it, but because the sound is satisfying. Tomorrow, you'll try a filled bread, milk dough with a garlic onion center, like a Viking calzone. Sort of. Night comes quietly. The goats settle, the fire dims, and the air smells like ash and ambition. You lie back, full of ideas and barley, and the warmth that only comes from making something real, from scratch, and watching it disappear into happy mouths. You close your eyes, and somewhere between wakefulness and dreaming, you imagine biting into a loaf that's still warm, the steam curling past your nose, the crust cracking just right. That's the goal, the legend, the chewy truth. Awaiting continue. Your eyes blink open to a flicker of low firelight and the steady crackle of embers. The smell of roasted onion clings to the air, and just for a second, you forget whether it's morning or some delicious fever dream. Then your stomach growls like a bear with indigestion, and that clears things right up. Time to bake. Again. The milk bread experiment has lit something in you, a hunger not just for food, but for better food. And today, you're chasing the next frontier, filled bread, not just flavored, not just topped. We're talking little dough pockets of surprise. Imagine biting in and discovering a warm center of garlic, herbs, maybe a chunk of dried meat if you're feeling brave. That's the plan. You scrape the last of your flour into the wooden bowl, coarse barley, a handful of rye, and a scoop of cracked oats for texture. Then you warm the goat's milk. Bjorn number 1 has been cooperative this week. Bjorn number 2 is on a strike, possibly unionizing, and stir in a touch of honey and salt. The dough comes together soft and fragrant, already hinting at magic. Mainstream historical fact. While there's little direct archaeological evidence for filled breads in the Viking world, their culinary ingenuity is well documented through diverse cooking techniques like boiling, pit roasting, and fermenting. It's entirely plausible that bread, a staple of the diet, evolved into something more than just a dry side dish, especially during long winters when innovation meant survival. You scoop spoonfuls of your garlic onion filling, prepared the night before, roasted in embers until it collapsed into sweet, savory perfection, and start shaping the dough. A little scoop in the center, then you fold it like a clamshell, pinch the edges, and set it to rest near the hearth. Your cousin peers over your shoulder. "What is that? A dumpling?" You shrug. "A pocket of happiness." A quirky tidbit. In some Norse myths, food appears as enchanted or symbolic offerings. One tale describes a magical meal that never runs out, replenishing itself for a chosen warrior. You can't help but wonder, if that meal were bread, it'd definitely have a gooey center. You nestle the filled dough balls in a pot lined with warm stones. It's a trick your aunt taught you. The stones help distribute heat more evenly and crisp the bottom. You cover them with the iron lid, bank the coals around, and wait. Again, the waiting has gotten easier. You don't poke the dough every 5 minutes now. You sit back, sip lukewarm goat's milk, not as awful as it sounds, and imagine a future where your breads are famous enough to be bartered for boats. Big ones. When you finally lift the lid, The smell hits you like a story you've known your whole life but never told out loud. Sweet, earthy, deeply comforting. The loaves are golden, puffed just slightly, and when you tear one open, the steam curls around your fingers and the filling glistens. You take a bite. Oh yes. The crust has a soft chew. The inside is creamy and sharp from the roasted onion, and there's a gentle sweetness from the milk and honey that lingers at the edges. You've invented something. You've invented joy. Your brother takes one, mutters something that sounds suspiciously like witchcraft, and walks off, chewing with his eyes wide. Your aunt eats two in a row. Your cousin hides one in her tunic for later, which is a compliment in Viking terms. Historians still argue whether Viking cuisine was as bland as earlier scholars claimed, or whether it was secretly rich in flavor and variety. Recent studies of hearth remains and food residues suggest the latter. Meats slow roasted with herbs, breads seasoned with wild ingredients, even fermented sauces. It wasn't all just gruel and dry loaves. And here you are, proving them right with every buttery, garlicky bite. That afternoon, you go foraging with your cousin. The woods are cool and damp, dotted with mushrooms and mossy logs. You collect a bundle of herbs, wild thyme, a little savory, and something minty that you think isn't poisonous. You also find wild berries, which spark another idea. Sweet pockets, fruit-filled breads, maybe with crushed nuts on top. You whisper it like a secret. Dessert bread. Your cousin scoffs. You mean cake? You narrow your eyes. I mean Viking dessert bread. Don't ruin the branding. Back at the longhouse, you mash the berries into a kind of jam, stirring with a stick until your hands are stained purple. You mix another batch of dough, thicker this time to hold the wet filling, and begin shaping small parcels. As you work, you hum an old song your mother used to sing, something about shipwrecks and sea spirits and lost rings. It fits. The dessert breads bake more slowly, the sugar in the berries caramelizing and sticking to the bottom of the pot in a way that makes you both delighted and mildly panicked. You loosen them carefully, biting your lip, but when the first one comes free, it's perfect. Slightly charred edges, juicy center, warm enough to burn your tongue, but you do it anyway. By dinner, you've fed half the village, or at least the hungry part. People show up just to say hi, but somehow leave with warm loaves tucked under their arms. You're running a bread speakeasy out of a longhouse kitchen. You collapse near the fire, arms dusted in flour, and think about what's next. A savory wreath with cheese? A layered barley flatbread with wild greens baked in? The ideas don't stop, and neither do you. That night, you dream of a feast hall made entirely of bread. The walls crusty, the benches soft and doughy, the fire pit made of toasted rye bricks. It's absurd, and you love it. In the dream, a jarl eats your berry pocket, sighs deeply, and offers you a seat at the high table. Maybe one day. Maybe tomorrow. Section 11. You're standing on a log with a loaf of bread in one hand and a string of fish in the other. One slip and you're falling into a stream so cold your thoughts will freeze into tiny snowflakes. Why are you here? Because you made a promise. Trade bread for fish. And the fisherman lives across the stream, because of course he does. You take a breath, balance like a goat with a diploma in tightrope walking, and make it across. Barely. You pretend it was easy. The fisherman, tall, beard like a frayed broom, grunts in approval and takes the bread. You get 2 fat trout in return. A fair trade. On the walk back, you think about what bread buys. Not just food. It buys goodwill, protection, the occasional favor. It's becoming currency. You're not just baking anymore. You're doing business. Mainstream historical fact. While coins existed during the Viking Age, especially from trade with the Middle East and Europe, much of the day-to-day economy was barter-based. Goods like cloth, livestock, and yes, food were often exchanged directly. A well-made loaf could hold genuine value in local trade networks. Back home, you clean the fish, roast them slowly on sticks over open coals, and flake the meat into a bowl. Then the idea hits. Fish bread. Wait, don't gag. Think of it like a rustic fish pie, encased in a soft barley crust seasoned with herbs and a bit of tangy whey. Your aunt is unconvinced. That's unusual. Your cousin is worse. That's disgusting. But you press on. You mix your dough richer than usual to counter the fishiness and fold in herbs, wild mustard leaves, salt, and thyme. Then you spoon a bit of fish into each round, seal them tight, and tuck them into the pot. This is either brilliance or madness. While it bakes, you think back to earlier days. Burnt crusts, flour storms, bread so hard it nearly took out your uncle's last good tooth. Now look at you, trading bread for fish, feeding people, inspiring debate, possibly warping the family taste buds forever. A quirky tidbit: in some parts of Scandinavia, early proto-breads were made with animal blood, not human. Just in case you were worried. Blood pancakes are still a thing in some Nordic cuisines. Not common in Viking bread, but the idea of mixing meat or fish into dough isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. The bread finishes with a deeply savory scent, earthy, meaty, warm. You slice one open. The steam is rich, and the filling, surprisingly, works. The dough has kept the fish moist. The herbs cut the oiliness. It's like a Viking tuna melt. Kind of. Historians still argue whether Viking bread recipes included any kind of meat or fish. Most evidence says no. Bread and meat were eaten separately. But given how resourceful people were with leftovers and how nothing was wasted, some scholars believe combinations existed, especially in more remote regions or for travel rations. The family verdict is mixed. Your brother eats 3. Your cousin makes gagging sounds but eats 2. Your aunt says, well, it's warm. You'll take it. That evening, you start sketching symbols again. You've got a growing bread code. A circle with a slash means garlic. A tiny fish carved into the crust means, obviously, fish inside. Brace yourself. You carve these into the dough before baking. Bread becomes a message, a promise, a warning, an invitation, a language. You realize, sitting by the fire, that your bread is no longer just food. It's become expression. Your hands tell stories through flour and heat. Every bite is a sentence. Some are poetry. Some are arguments. All are honest. The next morning, the village hunter shows up. He's got a haunch of smoked venison and a deep suspicion of anything not eaten with a knife. You give him a garlic onion loaf. He takes one bite, squints, then says something that might be praise. It doesn't taste like grass. Then he offers meat for more. Deal struck. Later that week, you trade a sweet loaf for beeswax, another for linen thread. Your cousin calls you the bread witch now. It's affectionate, mostly. You start experimenting with wrapped loaves, dough folded entirely over fillings, then sealed tight and buried in embers. These cook slowly, almost steaming in their own pocket. They're dense but flavorful, perfect for travel, perfect for warriors on long marches. You call them war loaves. You bake 6 and hand them out at the training field. The young fighters look confused, then delighted. One of them tries to duel you for the recipe. You decline politely. As the fire crackles that night, you imagine these loaves traveling across the fjords, through forests, onto ships bound for Iceland, or the Russlands, or the British Isles. Your bread crossing oceans, feeding stories. You can almost hear a future voice. This was made by someone who cared. That's the goal, right? To matter through flour. To be remembered in crumbs. Awaiting continue. Section 12. The rain arrives in sideways sheets, cold enough to slice through fur and thick enough to soak your socks within seconds. You're not baking today. You're enduring. The wind howls like it's lost something, and your thatch roof leaks in 3 new places, 2 of them directly over your storage shelf. The third is just for variety. You grab your sourdough starter, a precious, bubbling lump of personality you've been nurturing like a cranky pet, and wrap it tight in wool. Priorities. The weather traps everyone indoors. Cabin fever brews as fast as your barley mash, and suddenly you find yourself surrounded by a very bored family. Your cousin starts carving faces into root vegetables. Your brother tries to juggle knives. It's getting weird, so naturally you suggest, let's make bread games. Your aunt gives you a look like you've suggested dancing naked in the snow, but she's also run out of socks to darn. So, it's a maybe. You gather your ingredients. There's not much. Winter's scraping the pantry thin. Still, you manage coarse rye flour, old milk, and a whisper of dried herbs. You tell everyone, we'll each shape a loaf. No 2 can look alike. Best one wins a smoked fish. Now they're listening. Mainstream historical fact. Bread molds and specialty shapes have been found in various archaeological digs across Europe, though there's little direct evidence that Vikings used molds regularly. That said, Ceremonial breads and decorative loaves were part of many ancient cultures, and there's no reason to believe the Norse skipped out on a chance to get creative, especially during long winters. Your brother makes a lopsided wolf head. Your cousin sculpts what might be a longship or possibly a goat in a hat. You go for a twisted braid loaf, wrapping thin ropes of dough together like a sleepy snake. The baking starts. The fire roars. The longhouse smells like heaven and competition. Then disaster strikes. Your starter explodes. Okay, not exactly, but something goes wrong. It bubbles out of its jar like it's possessed. It smells sharper than usual. The dough you made with it spreads too fast like it's melting. Your cousin laughs. Your aunt frowns. You poke it. It jiggles. You bake it anyway. A quirky tidbit. Some ancient sourdough starters were accidentally contaminated with wild yeasts or bacteria that changed the flavor drastically. In a few cases, these mutant starters became cherished for their unique tang. In others, they were tossed with suspicion and prayers. One old Swedish folktale warns of demon bread that sang before it baked. Your demon bread rises unevenly, browns too fast, and cracks open like it's yawning. But when you taste it, it's good. Weirdly good, almost cheesy, complex. You pretend you meant to do it. Historians still argue whether Norse bakers maintained sourdough starters or used simple one-day leavening. There's no definitive proof either way, but considering how useful sourdough cultures are, especially in colder climates, it's possible that some form of ongoing fermentation was passed down through households. You give your bread a name, Stormloaf. It's got character, like someone who sleeps in trees and tells jokes to crows. The other loaves come out well, too. Your cousin's goat hat ship actually tastes decent. Your brother's wolf is underbaked in the snout, but he eats it anyway, declaring it symbolic. You declare a tie. Nobody gets the fish. Everyone gets bread. That seems fair. Later that evening, with the storm still howling and your socks drying by the hearth, you write down what you can remember of the day's experiments. Not just ingredients, but shapes. You sketch the braids, the twists, the patterns scratched into the crust. You're building a library now, not just of recipes, but of forms. You test another idea, a small coiled loaf, like a cinnamon roll, but savory. You fill it with herbs and a smear of goat cheese. It bakes into a chewy spiral, the layers gently separating, the scent cutting through the smoke and wet wool of the longhouse. You call it a round spiral storm scroll. Your cousin says that's too long. You ignore her. And then you go bold. You decide to try baking on a shield. Yes, a shield. You've heard stories of warriors cooking flatbreads on their warm shields over campfires. It sounds insane. It also sounds awesome. So you sneak one of your brother's practice shields. It's dented anyway. Clean it, oil it with a rag, and press a flat round of dough onto it. You hold it over the fire, carefully, like it's sacred. The dough bubbles. The edges crisp. Smoke swirls around your hands. It works, kind of. The bottom burns, but the top stays soft. You scrape off the worst of the char, break a piece off, and take a bite. It's smoky, chewy, deeply rustic. Warrior toast. You leave the shield by the fire to cool. Your brother finds it later, says nothing, just raises an eyebrow and walks away chewing. You feel triumphant. These experiments, these little risks and storms and accidental cheeses, they're shaping something new. Something ancient, too. You're not just replicating Viking food, you're living it. Letting it teach you what it can be. Tomorrow, maybe you'll try ash baking, or a fire pit loaf, or bread you hide underground for 3 days to ferment. Who knows? You're listening now. To the dough, to the fire, to the wild, and it's got so much more to say. Word count, 1,000 continue. Section 13. The snow is gone, not melted, vanished. A storm swept in from the sea last night, bringing strange thunder and a mist so thick it felt like you were breathing soup. And now this morning, your world looks new. Trees slick with rain, grass shock green, mud sucking at your boots like it missed you. So naturally, you bake. But today's different. You're not just feeding family or bribing the blacksmith. You've been summoned to the longhouse where the elders gather for seasonal council. You're not exactly part of the council. You're part of the refreshments. The chieftain's daughter requested your bread, which is flattering, and also terrifying. You've never baked for power before. Mainstream historical fact, Viking chieftains often held seasonal gatherings, things, which were both political assemblies and social feasts. Food was status, and the ability to serve impressive fare, even simple bread, reflected both hospitality and wealth. So you go all in. You start before sunrise, grinding the last of your fine flour, which you've hoarded for months. You mix it with goat milk, warmed by hand, and sweeten the dough with dried berries soaked overnight in honey mead. It's sticky, rich, indulgent. This isn't survival food. This is celebration. You knead by firelight. The dough stretches and sighs, and you work it like you're braiding a dream. Then you twist the loaves into crescents and coil them like serpents. On top, you sprinkle crushed hazelnuts and a dusting of birch ash, for contrast, for mystery, for drama. You call it mist bread. You have no idea if they'll like it. As the loaves bake, you wrap them in thick cloth and carry them through the misty morning to the great hall. You pass fishermen sharpening knives, children poking at puddles, and one very sleepy dog who refuses to move from the middle of the road. You step over him. Inside, the longhouse hums with low voices and wet boots. You're directed to a table near the fire pit, where others are placing roasted meats, root stews, and jugs of fermented everything. You place your bread carefully, arrange the loaves with their swirled ends facing outward, like offerings. And then, you wait. A quirky tidbit? Some Viking-age households buried special food items, often breads or cakes, in ceremonial pits, later consumed during feasts to connect with the ancestors. Some loaves were marked with runes or strange indentations, possibly to indicate blessings or ownership. One burnt fragment discovered in Denmark even had what looked like a fingerprint baked into it. You consider pressing your thumbprint into one of the mist breads. Decide against it. Too weird. The chieftain's daughter appears. She's younger than you expected, dressed in layered wool and a cloak with bright beads stitched into the collar. She picks up one of your loaves like it's a curious bird. She smells it. She breaks it. She tastes. She smiles. Then she takes another. And just like that, you're in. Not in the council. Not in the power circle, but in the story. Because when they talk about this day, when decisions are debated, alliances formed, arguments made and broken, they'll remember the food. They'll remember your bread. Historians still argue whether food artisans, like bakers, held formal status in Viking society. Most evidence suggests they were seen more as practical contributors than social elites. But some oral traditions elevate cooks and brewers as essential to maintaining peace and community, especially during gatherings. Because let's be honest, no one wants to argue politics while hangry. The chieftain himself tries a slice. He grunts, then eats more. That's high praise. Someone asks what you call it. You say, mist bread. They nod, like that means something. You watch from a shadowed corner as your loaves vanish. One man wraps a chunk in cloth to take home. Another dips his into hot broth, steam rising like a spell. You feel proud and exhausted. On the way home, you're stopped by an old woman you barely know. She presses a bone pendant into your hand and says, "For your hands." They remember the old ways. You thank her, confused, and tuck it into your pouch. Later that night, you sit by the fire, fingers warm from baking, back aching in the good way. The rain returns, softer now, tapping the roof like a sleepy cat. You think of the stories being told right now, about alliances and weather, and that bread with the crunchy top and the berry inside. You smile. Then you get an idea. A bread that tells a prophecy. Not literally, of course. But what if you carved symbols into the crust, random ones, and let people interpret them? Bread as fortune, bread as omen, bread as Rorschach test. You bake a test loaf. You score the top with spirals, slashes, and dots. It's abstract, mysterious. You bring it to your brother. He frowns. What's it say? You shrug. Depends on who eats it. He takes a bite. It says, "I need more salt." You try again. A new loaf, with the rune for journey and a wave pattern. You tell your cousin it's a voyage loaf. She takes it to the docks and gives it to a sailor. Later, he leaves on a trip and returns with amber from the south coast. Coincidence? Maybe. But people start to ask for the prophecy bread. You lean into the myth. Every loaf gets a name, every pattern a meaning. Some say you've gone soft in the head, others say you're a witch. Most just say, "Can I get one with the harvest rune?" You nod. Sure, but you have to eat it under the moon. They don't argue, because the truth is, even the hard-nosed skeptics want a little magic with their carbs. And you're happy to oblige. Awaiting continue. Section 14. The day begins with a knock on your door. Not a friendly knock. A rhythmic, intentional knock. The kind that says, "This isn't about borrowing honey." You open it to find two travelers standing there, soaked from sea mist, cloaked in salt-stiff wool. They introduce themselves as gleemen, storytellers, performers, song weavers, and apparently bread enthusiasts. "We heard," one says, brushing a fish scale off his shoulder, "about the loaf that tells the future. Your prophecy bread." You invite them in because, obviously, they sit by the fire, boots steaming, and you serve them toasted scraps and mead. They eat in quiet reverence, like monks with crunchy mouths. Then they explain their real purpose. They want to trade. You give them bread. They give you stories. Mainstream historical fact. Traveling bards and skalds, poets, were an essential part of Norse society. They preserved history, relayed news, and entertained. They were also powerful memory keepers. Many of our sagas today exist because of them. And in return, they were often fed generously and given shelter. So naturally, you say yes. They stay 3 nights. Each evening, they sing beside the hearth. Ballads of sea kings, feuding brothers, star-crossed lovers, and one rather concerning tale about a man who tried to marry his own sheep. You try not to ask follow-up questions, but on the 3rd night, they tell you a story that makes your hair rise. It's about a baker. A woman who lived at the edge of the world, who could whisper to grain and knead storms into loaves. Her bread never molded. Her crusts cracked with runes no one carved. People came from miles to taste it. Some said it could cure sickness. Others claimed it made you dream of your ancestors. You blink. "Is this a real person?" One of them smiles. "Does it matter?" You go quiet. Because deep down, you wonder, could you be that story centuries early? The next morning, they're gone. Just like that. But they leave a gift behind. A carved wooden stamp, smooth with use, etched with a spiraling knot pattern. No note, no explanation. You press it into the next batch of dough. It leaves a perfect mark. You bake the loaf, and when you slice into it, steam rises in a perfect curl. A neighbor tries it, claims it made him dream of his dead uncle. You don't question it. A quirky tidbit. In some Nordic regions, wooden bread stamps or carved boards were used to imprint designs into dough, both for decoration and symbolic purposes. Some motifs were tied to fertility, protection, or even hexing. Few survive intact, but their ghost prints remain on excavated bread fragments. Your reputation grows. Soon, people come not just for nourishment, but for meaning. One brings a swaddled baby and asks for a naming loaf. Another wants a bread that will win her a husband. A third brings a handful of dirt and says, "Can you bake something that'll make crops grow?" You try. You bake a tiny round loaf filled with wild seeds, wrapped in nettle leaf, marked with the rune for growth. She plants it in her field. It might work, it might not. But it feels real. Historians still argue whether the spiritual role of food in Norse households was formalized or more informal, woven into daily superstitions and seasonal rituals. Some believe bread was merely survival. Others say it carried deep, unspoken meaning, especially in households without formal priests. You begin keeping a bread book, a thin leather folio filled with symbols, meanings, results. Which herbs seemed luckier? Which patterns scored deeper in crust? Which dreams followed which loaves? You invent a ritual, whispering to the dough as you need. Not words, just sound. Like a breath, like humming. You tell no one. It's yours. And then, as if summoned by your growing legend, a woman arrives. Tall, wrinkled like wind-chopped stone, draped in gray wool. She smells faintly of pine. She says nothing at first, just stands near your hearth and watches you bake. You offer her food. She accepts only a crust. Chews slow, nods once. Finally, she speaks. You've remembered what most forget. You blink. What's that? She doesn't answer. Just drops something into your hand. A tiny linen bundle tied with red thread. You open it. Inside, black grain. Charred. Ancient. She's already gone. You plant it. The next spring, something new grows. Tall stalks with dark heads. You grind a little into flour and mix it with barley. The dough is darker, earthier. The crust bakes with crackles like veins. You call it ember grain bread. No one has ever tasted anything like it. You serve it warm, with ash butter and pickled mushrooms. A local healer claims it makes her dreams clearer. A hunter swears it steadies his aim. You start wearing a necklace made from old bread stamps, strung on twisted flax. People start calling you the kneader of luck. You pretend to laugh. But a part of you, The part that listens to dough believes it. The bakery becomes a quiet sanctuary. People leave things, feathers, teeth, small bone charms. You hang them by the hearth, not for decoration, for balance. One night, the bread sings. It hisses and pops and whistles as it bakes, like it's speaking in a tongue no one has taught you, but somehow you understand. It says more is coming. You stay up late, writing. The next day, a ship arrives in the harbor, with strangers and strange grain. Your journey is about to widen. But tonight, the oven glows, the bread rises, the cymbals hold, and you dream not of war or storms or frost. You dream of a table, long as the horizon, covered in bread. Everyone you've ever fed is seated, and they are waiting for more. Awaiting continue. Section 15. The ship creaks against the dock, sails sagging from a long voyage, hull crusted with barnacles and sea salt. You stand a safe distance back, flower still on your sleeves, arms crossed like a skeptical raven watching a newcomer in the village square. You've heard rumors of this one. Traders from the south, maybe even the far east. And most importantly, they've brought grain. Not just any grain. Something unfamiliar. Golden. Slender. Almost shimmering in the sun like it's been sunbathing somewhere far more exotic than your cold little coastal corner of the world. You approach, basket in hand, trying to look casual, like you're here to check the weather, not salivate over sacks of possibility. Mainstream historical fact. The Vikings were enthusiastic traders, not just raiders, and their voyages stretched from North America to the Middle East. With these journeys came exotic goods, including spices, textiles, and new grains such as durum wheat and emmer, which expanded the culinary potential of Norse kitchens. You trade dried fish and smoked goat for a handful of the new grain. It clinks softly in your palm like little bronze beads. You sniff. No scent. You chew one. Tough, nutty, interesting. You bring it home, toast it over the hearth, grind it into flour with your smaller, slower quernstone. You mix it with water, a little wild yeast, and watch the dough rise, fast and wild, like it's excited to exist. The crust bakes glossy. The smell is heady, almost floral. You break the loaf open and steam unfurls with a sweetness you've never known. You taste it. Your eyebrows rise like sails in a summer breeze. You name it sun grain bread. You serve it at the next feast. People cheer. A quirky tidbit, archaeologists have found evidence of durum wheat as far north as Denmark in Viking-age layers, though how widespread its use was is debated. It may have been seen as luxurious or foreign, reserved for special guests or ceremonies. Historians still argue whether these imported grains had any spiritual or ceremonial value, or were simply status symbols, proof of your reach and wealth. But standing in that firelit longhouse, watching villagers bite into your golden loaves like they've discovered a new season, it's hard not to believe you're witnessing something sacred. With the new grain, your bread evolves. You begin making layers, swirling honey between folds, braiding herbs inside. You slice designs into the crust before baking, brush them with oil so they glisten like wet stone. Your loaves look like they belong on a king's table, or maybe a god's. More travelers come. They bring spices. You try cinnamon. Your eyes roll back in your head. You try saffron. You immediately guard your loaf like a dragon hoarding treasure. You mix black salt into one dough, swirl it with forest berries, and top it with elderflower syrup. A child tries it and declares it magic cake. You don't correct her. People begin asking for your blessing before they eat your bread. You don't know what to say, so you just place a warm hand on their shoulder and whisper something low and vague, "May the crust crack just right." They nod like you're Odin's pastry chef. You start to wonder if this is what it means to be a legend. Not loud, not crowned, just baked into the daily dreaming of your people. You build a second oven. You carve runes into its stones, not for decoration, but to honor the heat, the rise, the sacred crackle of crust. One day, a child asks you what your bread means. You pause. Then you say, "It means we're still here." The seasons spin, summer, then storm, then snow. And in all of them, you bake. Through births and funerals, hunts and floods. You bake. You try a loaf with rose hips and vinegar. It's terrible. You laugh so hard you nearly choke on it. You try another with pine resin. You call it forest cough. But then you try honeyed garlic and wild onion and you keep that one. The people begin calling you the loaf witch. You pretend to protest, but you secretly love it. You make a bread shaped like the moon, one like a bear paw, one like a spiral. You invent bread for festivals that don't exist yet, just to make winter feel shorter. And then one day, you see a child, barely tall enough to reach the table, kneading her own dough, with careful fingers, humming. You don't say anything. You just pass her a pinch of salt and keep kneading. Because this is how it all continues. And bread is never just food. Bread is survival. Bread is story. Bread is home. So now you can let your shoulders ease back. The ovens have cooled. The flour settled in a soft hush across the table. Outside, the village snores gently under a quilt of night, and the sea laps slow and steady against the shore like it's breathing with you. You can still smell it, can't you? That last golden loaf, still warm in the middle, cracked on top like the sky breaking open with dawn. You baked something real. Something that fed not just bellies, but memories. Something that said, "You matter." Let your breath slow now. Picture the hearth. The low fire, the rhythmic creak of old wood, the comfort of something rising just beneath the surface. Feel your fingers press gently into dough, warm and alive. Feel the pulse of it, the promise, the softest kind of magic. You've traveled far tonight, across frost-hardened fields and smoke-sweet feasts, past storm-tossed docks, and into quiet kitchens where stories rise like steam. And all along you've been held, by grain, by memory, by the hush between bites. The stars are high now, the ovens are empty, but your hands remember. So rest them, rest everything, and dream of bread that sings. Word counted plus 300 wind down 1400. End of script. Sweet dreams.